Our guest today is Kate Lovelady, who is leader for the Ethical Society of St. Louis. Kate was raised in New York City and found ethical humanism as a young woman in North Carolina. She received an undergraduate degree in poetry and essay writing from Northwestern University. Inspired by attending the AEU Lay Leadership Summer School to apply for professional leader training, after being accepted as a trainee, she worked as an intern at ethical societies in Riverdale, Yonkers, Manhattan, and Austin, Texas. What do you know? There's an Austin, Texas mug right here. She was hired by the Ethical Society of St. Louis as their leader in 2005. She currently serves at St. Louis alongside leader James Croft. Kate's address today is titled Choosing Community. Please welcome Kate Lovelady to the podium.
It's hard to follow that sort of introduction. It's really nice to be here live, and I appreciate that you're willing to invite me after being subjected to so many of my words by Eric. And it's lovely to be in this room too. It's a beautiful space. Our space is also beautiful in St. Louis, but there's no natural light. And so being able to be in here and all this light is fantastic. So good morning, everyone. My topic this morning, as Eric said, is choosing community, and I'm so glad that we also had a chance to chat about it for a few minutes, and I got to hear a couple thoughts from some of your members. We do talk a lot about community at ethical societies. As ethical humanist congregations, of course, ethical societies provide the benefits of traditional religious organizations, which include things like education and inspiration and support and fellowship, and we do this all within a context of shared values and a basic shared naturalistic worldview of sort of what the world is and what makes it go around. And so ethical societies are communities. And in fact, although people visit and join ethical societies for a variety of reasons, the number one thing people say that they were seeking, at least when they come and visit and join our society, and I'm betting it's true of your society as well, is they say they came seeking community. And so, in fact, all that may seem pretty obvious. But when you think about it, it's actually kind of odd, because there are more people on Earth than ever before. Many environmentalists might say that there's too many people on Earth. And each of us was born into or adopted into a community, a family with a history and traditions. And we all live somewhere. We live in neighborhoods. We go to schools or jobs or volunteer gigs, and these are all communities in one way or another. Demographers and journalists talk about communities all the time. They talk about the Westchester community, or within that, the LGBTQIA plus community, or the African American community, the Jewish community, the Italian community, the Latino community. Maybe not too long in the future, more articles will reference the humanist community, and they'll make claims about how the humanist community is feeling about this issue or that issue. So then the first question is, if we are all already members of multiple communities, why would we need to seek community? It's true that some of us have consciously rejected, or we've been rejected by, maybe, some of the communities that we were born into, and so we chose to leave those communities or were kicked out of them, but we remain members of lots of communities. So in some ways, seeking community seems sort of like saying, I'm seeking oxygen. Like, isn't it everywhere? But maybe this is just a semantic issue, right? People use the word community in lots of different ways to mean lots of different things. And maybe if we were speaking in a language other than English, perhaps we would just have separate words for these things. There would be a separate word for a group of people related by demographic similarities. If this were German, that would be one word, right? You just smush all those words together. So that would be one kind of word, and then there'd be a separate word for something else, this something else, this group of people who what? Exactly. What do we mean when we say, I came to the Ethical Society because I need community? Or even as many people say, I like the platforms and the music, I like the leadership, I like the Sunday school, but I am a member of the Ethical Society first and foremost for the community. What is this meaning? What is this experience of community that we are talking about? What makes it different from the communities that we were born into or that we become a part of because of where we choose to live or where we happen to work or any number of other things? I think when people seek or talk about what they appreciate about ethical societies as communities, they don't necessarily mean people I know well. Because even in a relatively intimate group, people come and go, and it's hard for anyone to get to know everybody, really, in a personal way. So we don't necessarily mean that. And we don't necessarily mean people I like a lot, because even if all of us could get to know each other really well, we probably wouldn't all really like each other a lot, right? Like, let's be honest. People are different. People click or they don't click for lots of different reasons. And similarly, I don't think we mean people I agree with, because goodness knows we don't all agree on everything all the time. So what do we mean that the Ethical Society is the community many of us have looked for? When I first joined an ethical society, it was in North Carolina. And my first visit there happened to be on an off Sunday. They would have a platform, then they'd have a discussion, platform discussion. And the week that I happened to come was the week after the business meeting. So it was sort of like a discussion on a discussion. I think there were like 7 people there. And they were all, I think, 30 years older than I happened to be at the time. But I had bicycled there, so I wasn't leaving, and they were really friendly. Actually, at first they were like, oh no, please come back next week. This is not going to be a good experience for you. This is not really what a platform is about. And I was like, well, I bicycled here, so I'm staying. And I hung out and I joined them for lunch. And in our conversation, I discovered that despite outward appearances, outward differences, that these were my people. I had that feeling of these were my people. We cared about similar things. We were concerned about similar things. We had a similar vision of what progress looked like. Progress personally in our lives as people, progress in our wider community. And although it wasn't said out loud, I felt that we all knew that we needed and that we wanted each other's support. Emotional support, intellectual support, practical support, that we needed each other to act more effectively on the things we cared about. And this is the kind of community I think that we often do need to seek out, that for most of us is not an automatic given of birth or circumstance. The kind of community we need to choose to become a member of and to commit to and to help sustain. The kind that not only believes in the values that are embodied in, say, the Ethics for Children core values here, which we share in our SEEK program in St. Louis, in the Ethical Society's mission statement, but that also understands that these values only become realized when people do commit to each other. Whether that's through being willing to share who we really are with each other, what we really think, how we really feel, whether that is adding our voices and our bodies together to have greater effectiveness in our ethical action, or relying on the kindness and support of others so that we can stretch our comfort zones and grow personally, so that we can try new things. That might be speaking from the podium, it might be facilitating a colloquy or a class, might be participating in an ethical action, It might be just sitting together in silence or singing together, serving in lay leadership, just maybe asking someone at coffee hour if they might like to go get some better coffee somewhere sometime. And maybe our coffee is bad. Your coffee is probably better here in New York, but reaching out, being willing to be brave and seek out a new friend. Some of my favorite quotes about the role of this kind of community are from a book called Habits of the Heart: Individualism and Commitment in American Life. Have any of you read this book? I'm sure Bart has. It appropriately has multiple authors, too. One of the quotes is, "We discover who we are face to face and side by side with others in work, love, and learning. We find ourselves not independently of other people and institutions, but through them. We never get to the bottom of ourselves on our own." So for a person to understand that they are a member of many communities and yet still feel a lack of community that they seek to fill is not just a semantic confusion. It's not like saying, I need oxygen. It's more like saying, yes, there is oxygen everywhere in my life, but somehow there is still not a place where I can really breathe, where I can breathe freely and breathe deeply and feel fully alive. There is a kind of community that feels deeper, that feels more intentional, that feels more inspiring and supportive than the broader and more impersonal communities that, for the most part, we did not really choose to be a part of. How then do we cultivate such a form of community? Because it is something that needs constant cultivation. I think it helps to think of community not as a place or even as a particular collection of people, but as an activity. Cultivating community requires commitments of time and emotional energy and resources, time for thoughtful sharing, time sometimes to do research to help the community gain knowledge, time to listen, sometimes to provide practical support to others in times of need. Emotional energy, we know, is something that we need when we seek to connect and find common ground. It's fine to have values, but to put them into practice takes a lot of energy of different kinds. Community is not just a place where people are nice to each other and have a snack together. Community should be a verb, I feel like. And we do have a verb, right? We have the verb commune. And maybe I'm obsessed with words because I do have an undergraduate degree in poetry, as Eric mentioned, but I started thinking about this verb, commune, and I think it just kind of shows us more about our ambivalence about community, because turned into a noun, the word commune, right? Think about the word commune. What does that make you think of? I think for lots of people today, it brings up visions of hippies and lentils. Lentils. Yes. Now, and no disparagement meant to anything real. I am a vegan, so lentils are very important to me personally. They are a delicious superfood. Communes still exist today. Some people find them wonderful places to live. I'm just saying that for most of us, a commune is sort of a shorthand for too much community, for a lack maybe of individual responsibility and maybe quite not enough privacy. And then we have the word commune as a verb. And this has, I think, a meaning of a deep connection that transcends our personal concerns, the petty details of everyday life, to commune. But interestingly, I almost always hear this term used to talk about communing with nature, often about the experience of being alone in nature. And it's wonderful to feel deep connection with nature. I just wonder what it reveals, the fact that the two most common understandings of communing refer to either an absence of other humans or an excessive presence of other humans. We are born or we move into communities that we often decide to leave, or that we wish we weren't members of, or that we don't feel any deep connection to. And at the same time, we long for community. And the act of being in community can be so scary that it's often easier to imagine communing with trees than to have profoundly meaningful experiences with lots of other human beings. And I like trees a lot. I am an admitted tree hugger. But I propose that learning to commune with people is ultimately more satisfying even. Even though people, unlike trees, do not just stand there silently with their arms out, as long as we want. On the contrary, other people can be very difficult. And of course, each of us is someone else's other people, and we can be very difficult. So yes, choosing community sometimes means seeking out new people or a new organization where you feel more truly at home. And sometimes that can take several tries to find the right people, to find the right place at the right time for you. But choosing community, even more than that, I think means choosing to act in your chosen community to bring out the best in others and in yourself, which is, of course, one of our core values in ethical culture. And that is treating community as an activity, as a verb, and constantly asking, how are we in this community really communing with each other? How are we helping each other live our values and stretch our comfort zones? How are we caring for the community? How are we helping each other learn and grow? How are we inviting in and welcoming new people so that our community remains truly alive? And how am I personally a part of all of this? There's a lot of talk these days about tribalism. It was a word that came up in our small group, maybe in some other small groups. I do have to make an aside, though. One of the members of the St. Louis Society is an anthropologist who has lived with literal tribes in South America, and he's very upset about the misuse of the word tribe and tribal. He says it is all wrong and that it is an insult to the people who live in traditional tribal societies. So I am trying to find kind of a new term. But for now, I will just make that disclaimer and say that I think in common parlance, we know what we mean when we say America seems to be becoming more tribal, that more and more people are not just seeking to choose their own communities, but seeking to harden the borders of their communities, retreating into bubbles in which everyone sort of has the same sources of knowledge, everyone is assumed to think and feel the same. And that isn't always bad, not only in the anthropological sense, but that it can be enjoyable and harmless to belong to essentially fan clubs. So for instance, everyone who really enjoys Formula One racing can get together this afternoon and talk about the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, which I was trying to follow before I left my house, but I don't know who won. Are there any members of the Formula One? No, so my tribe is not here. And I can't talk about that, which is sad. It's nice to have places where you can just go and celebrate stuff and be real nerdy about it and not have to defend it all the time, because I know that Formula One racing is really bad for the environment. But, okay. So, yes, so fast, wastes a lot of gas. But, so, to get together with your people and talk about your stuff, but so it's not an essentially bad thing, but there are, of course, much more dangerous forms of this kind of group formation that we call tribalism. There are bubbles within which people simply recycle false stories. They seal in misinformation. They breed hatred and even violence. We need to learn more about how people learn or how people refuse to learn. We need to learn how to reach into each other's bubbles for all our sakes. And I am trying to learn how to do this starting in my own backyard. I don't know about you, but my Facebook friends tend to have the same political leanings that I do. And they forward a lot of the same political stuff, and little memes and stories. And I started a while back researching many of these news stories and alerts and memes that friends were posting. And often I would find that the story was outdated, or it was sort of presenting as this, oh my God, thing that actually happened that was just another random thought that our unfiltered president had tweeted out and didn't actually exist. Or the issue was just much more nuanced than it had been presented. And sometimes I respond with questions or maybe more information that I found from a different source. But more and more I find I am just kind of keeping quiet, because honestly, I'm afraid of being labeled or thought of as not really in the community of people who think like us. And that may not actually be the case. I may be doing my friends a disservice. This feeling may not be based so much on my relationship with them as with this sort of the heightening tensions of the times. But I do think that it's interesting that I am not known for being shy in my opinions, but I'm not sure anymore how to choose to be in community online. If a friend is posting a lot of stuff that I think is coming from a good place, but that I also think is sort of inaccurate or overly biased, do I just stop following them? Do I engage in comments and discussion sort of as respectfully as I can? But how often do I do that? Because if I question them too much, I worry that they'll just stop following me, because who wants to have their parade rained on all the time? Do I stay quiet because maybe it actually doesn't matter if someone is wrong on the internet, as the saying goes? But maybe it does matter, because it's all feeding into this sort of hyper-partisanship that's tearing our country apart. Maybe what we need to do is learn how to have these conversations with each other first in community, so that then we can have more difficult conversations with others and between communities. Because I think mostly we talk about how to talk to people who are really different than us, but I find that we're not that great talking even to people who are not that different from us. And that might be a good place to practice and learn some skills. One thing that concerns me is that it seems that people don't want to have their worst assumptions questioned. There's a benefit humans get from anger and negativity. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a dopamine release. Some of you probably know better, but in a recent platform in St. Louis, I was trying to make an argument against despair. And I made this recommendation to my society that they should dare to be unfashionably hopeful, because I think people need motivation, and I frankly am not motivated when I'm in despair. But after platform, one of our members said to me that they weren't ready to give up their despair. And I said, okay, whatever makes you happy. And yeah, we both laughed too. But there is something that we get from despair. If we assume the worst, we can never be disappointed again. We can only be pleasantly surprised if things turn out not quite so bad, if we're even willing to see that things have turned out not quite so bad. If you're very worried or scared, it's somehow comforting that other people are very worried or scared too. At least you're not alone. And as we know, mutual complaining over mutual enemies is a classic way to bond with others. It's also a classic way to escalate conflicts, and it's a classic way to foment violence. I believe that choosing the value of community should mean pulling together from love and care and positive vision, while remaining open to questions, open to those who are not currently in the community, versus bonding through anger or fear or despair, or seeing questions and outsiders as threats. Choosing community sometimes means embracing the community that you didn't choose, that you are a part of simply because of the accident of your birth or where you live, and asking how you can commune even with people you don't understand, maybe even sometimes with people that you think you fear. What does that look like? That looks like ethical living, I think. One of my favorite definitions of ethics is by Margaret Wheatley, when she wrote, "Ethics is how we behave when we decide we belong together." It's treating others as if you choose to be in community with them, even if they don't choose to be in community with you. Right now, it seems that a lot of people within states or across America or across the world are acting as if they have decided that not all human beings belong together. Neighbors are trying to disown each other, but we cannot disown each other because we are the human family. To have a flourishing democracy, too, we all need to choose to be in community with our unchosen community. And to me, that means not starting with negative assumptions about others' motives, but remembering that we share basic universal human needs and human values and seeking to connect however we can. We don't have to agree with someone to listen to them, to speak in a way that acknowledges their humanity and worth. When we respond to anger with anger or hate with hate, we are buying into the story that this country is not one community. There's a lot of concern these days about civility and how to communicate with people when we disagree. And this concern always seems to be with other people's incivility. But we can't control how other people communicate. We can only control our own communication. No matter how strongly we may feel about other people's communication, we cannot control it. We can only control how we communicate. I can only control how I communicate. And one way to think about how we want to communicate is to think about how we should listen and talk and post and tweet and act if we still believe that we are one city and one region and one state and one country and one world and one species and one people. You may or may not know that we have just gone through a contentious election. I see you are aware of this. Glad to know that. And just as it seems like every year the Christmas decorations go up earlier, every election seems to start earlier. So we're already basically at the beginning of the next election cycle, right? Or in the middle of it. So I suggest we all think more about how we express our feelings and our hopes and our fears, both before and during and after elections. Whether our candidates have won or lost, whether our hopes or our fears have been realized at any one moment, what kind of words and actions can we take part in or not take part in to show that no matter how a person votes or what the outcome, we still believe we all belong and that we all belong together? So I guess if I have a message this morning, it is to choose community. And yes, I hope people will continue to choose ethical society communities because they're great. They are a place to find and experience and practice ethical living. And as I said, it is something that we all need practice in. But much more than that, choose to be in community in your city, in your region, in your state, in the nation, in the world. Choose to be in community even with those who don't seem to want to be in community with you. Choose to treat all people as if they are members of your community, because one way or another we all are. Thank you so much for having me here, and I think I get to hear from you a little bit. Like musical interview first. Thank you.